The new wisdom literature. So one thing you guys have discovered I like to do is I like to tell you about controversial things here instead of finding it out. They seem to run the anti-Christian programming all around Easter every year or Christmas. I always like to do that and get into here. So one thing I want to teach you guys about is that there is discussion about all these letters, particularly Paul's letters, as to whether he wrote them or not. Okay. In general, scholars agree that there are certain ones that we're positive St. Paul wrote. And it's these first four to start with. Romans, 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, Galatians. There's nobody seriously contesting whether St. Paul wrote those or not. Philippians, 1 Thessalonians, Philemon for sure, and some people say 2 Thessalonians also are people like pretty sure that Paul wrote them. So why would people think that Paul didn't write the other ones? This all started around the time of Luther with a scholar named Erasmus. Why would people start to doubt that? Why don't I finish what I thought you can mark these in a little booklet if you want to, or if you just want to mentally keep track, it's fine. The ones that people contest whether Paul wrote them are Ephesians, Colossians, some scholars, 2 Thessalonians, the pastoral epistles, 1st, 2nd Timothy and Titus, and Hebrews. And it's fair to say that even conservative scholars at this point, a whole bunch of them would pretty much say 1st, 2nd Timothy, Titus, and Hebrews, all the ones on page 10, they're pretty sure Paul didn't write. So why would they say that? Well, the first one is very, very simple. The Greek is different. The second reason is that the topics are different. And the third reason is that there's an assumption of evolution in the early church. I'll call it development. Okay. So, to get into this, I'm going to put all my cards on the table at the beginning. Say I think St. Paul wrote all of them except Hebrews. Okay, there's a reason why I think these dogs don't hunt, and I know I'd be in the minority there, but to me, it's simply logical. And here's the reality: scholarship is subject to the trends of fashion, like any other human endeavor, and it is very, very fashionable right now in the academy and has been for maybe 150 years or so to just find problems with everything you study. Here's the reason why I've discovered that such and such doesn't really work, or this thing doesn't work. So right now it's almost like you won't get approved to write a doctoral dissertation unless you're being critical of something. Okay, it's just the reality of it. So here's the reason why, to take them in order. The Greek is different. So the first thing to notice about all of St. Paul's letters is that they are not even claimed to be written by Paul, right? They're called Paul's letters. They were bundled together in the early church that way. They were put together in a Pauline corpus. That's why Hebrews was put in with it. The reality of it is that none of them were written by Paul at all. We talked about this when we did the book of Romans. Those of who did this when we did it last year, or before we did it, Revelation. In that ancient world, no one wrote their own letters. You dictated your letter, and a scribe wrote it, or an amanuensis was the actual word for it. They wrote your letter for you, and it was expected that they would change your words. Their job was to help you say better what you were trying to say. So it was idea for idea, not word for word per se. Okay, so that's just point blank. And all the letters list the amanuensis. So-and-so wrote this for me. And occasionally St. Paul will go things like, notice I'm ending my letter in my own hand. I'm writing. This is the first time Paul's writing anything. Okay. So what would happen in the process was that, Melissa, I might dictate to you a letter to church council, and you'd write down stuff, and I might say stuff like and things like this, and you wouldn't write that down. You'd try to improve what I was saying, and then you'd hand it to me, and you'd say, "Is this what you wanted?" And I'd make corrections. I didn't want to say that. I think this would say a little better. And if anyone's ever edited a paper, they have to turn, and you know exactly how this works, right? I should have said this in a different way, right? Then I hand it back to you. You polish it up, and then you deliver the letter. That's the way it works. And by deliver, I don't mean you don't go there and hand it. You read it, and you explain to the people receiving it what I meant. Okay? So that's the way it works. Go beyond that. You'll notice a bunch of these letters, Paul has a co-author. Paul and Timothy writing to. That means Paul and Timothy are dictating to somebody else. Now, have you ever worked on a project with a friend? Like if you're co-writing something? Do you ever play the dance where I really don't like the way they said that, but this is probably a minor point. I'll let them do it. I don't want to correct them all the time and change. And you're going back and forth, and they're thinking the same thing about you, and you're trying not to step on each other's toes as you write the letter, right? And you're doing all this as somebody else is taking dictation. Of course, the Greek is different because sometimes you've got a different co-author, and you both have to be happy with it before it's sent, right? It gets even, and then when we get into, I should have turned to page 10 on the little booklet here. So 1st, 2nd Timothy and Titus are called the pastoral epistles. If you ever hear that phrase, they're called the pastoral epistles. The next section is starting at the bottom of page 10, running from James through the letters of Peter, John, and Jude, are called the Catholic epistles. Not because they're Roman Catholic. The word Catholic just means universal. So they're addressed to the whole church, not a particular church, right? Romans is written to the church at Rome. The book of James, as we just learned about, was written to the 12 tribes in the dispersion. That's like everybody everywhere. Okay, so these letters are meant to be read and written. They're written to the whole church rather than a specific church. Okay, so 1st, 2nd Timothy, and Titus are called the pastoral epistles because they are one pastor giving advice to another. Paul is about to die. He knows this. He knows the most likely ending of his trial in Rome is his execution. So he's writing to his protege, who helped him found a couple churches. Hey, here's what I want you to do while I'm dying. Okay? When I'm gone, do these things. Right? No, that makes pretty much sense, right? So I just wrote an article for a big national magazine, not big, college, added some comments to it at the bottom of it. Now that was an article, this was like a Catholic epistle. I was writing a letter to the whole church, right? Some ideas I had, and I wanted everyone to be thinking about them. She wrote back in a very particular way because she knows me. Now, do you think I would write that article the same way I would send you an email, Caleb? Right? I'm going to have a completely different set of topics. I'm going to use a completely different vocabulary. And especially if it's pastor to pastor, do you think pastors use technical language with each other we don't use with our parishioners? Yeah. You get a bunch of pastors together and it sounds like military jargon, right? Where everyone's got an acronym for everything and they assume you're keeping up. I wouldn't explain the word amanuensis to a group of pastors. I expect them to know it, right? So, of course, the vocabulary is different, and of course, the topics are different. That's why this doesn't work so well, right? And also even doesn't work to some degree with a co-author, because if I'm writing a letter with you, Annalisa, you may think certain topics are important, and I may think certain topics are important, and we got to kind of compromise as we write the letter together, right? So these two things it's like we're trying to put a modern way of thinking onto these ancient letters, and that's why we're coming up with weird conclusions. No one ever thought till Erasmus that Paul wasn't the author of these letters, except Hebrews. Hebrews was always a contention, which is why in your Bible it shows up. It's not attached to Paul's letters. It shows up in a different place. If you notice, all of Paul's letters are together in a group. There's a reason for that. That's the way they were collected, and they're not in the order they were written either. They go from longest to shortest. That's literally how they're organized. So, First Corinthians is Paul's first letter we have, and it's the second letter in your Bible there of Paul. So these three letters. The other reason why some people would say it doesn't that it doesn't work here. I'm going to get to assumption and development in a minute. The other reason people would say that maybe Paul didn't write 1st, 2nd Timothy, and Titus is because it doesn't line up with the book of Acts. There would need the way Paul talks in the letters. You'll see if we do 1st Timothy, you're going to see that it sounds like he took another missionary journey beyond the ones that are listed in the book of Acts. How does the book of Acts end, though? Is Paul dead at the end of the book of Acts? Nope. And it's not in the Bible, this other missionary journey, but the church always talked about it. It's in the oral tradition, and it's even in some of the early letters. So you can get a letter from about 90 AD from Ignatius, and he's like talking about Paul's other missionary journey. So Christians knew about it. It just wasn't written into the Bible. So again, if you come with this modern assumption that the book of Acts has everything in it, then you're going to say it's out of place. But if you realize that the book of Acts has certain things and that the other things kept happening, in fact, the book of Acts kind of ends almost like to be continued. Like Paul's on a journey, and that's how it ends. It's not even like you don't get the end of the journey. So you know that more is coming, and that's intentional on Luke's part because he wants us to realize the adventure continues in all of us. The Holy Spirit's working in all of us, and the life of the church continues. So that's the other reason why they're assumption of development. The other thing you're going to see is going to be this. There's an assumption going back to about the mid-19th century, so mid-1800s, that the church was a different religion, like Christianity and Judaism. There's this new religion. It takes a while to get things together. And 1st and 2nd Timothy talk about deacons and elders or presbyters and bishops. So that must have been written much later by someone only claiming to be Paul. Here's the problem with that from my perspective. Ignatius talks about all three of those, and everybody admits that. And like I said, he's writing around like 90, 100 AD. That's like 35 years after Paul. Do you really think they developed that fast? Like no one would have ever thought of it, and we suddenly came up with this big thing. And it's to be technical, it's full magisterial authority in the bishop. Ignatius is really, really clear. The bishop has absolute supreme authority. That's a weird thing to develop in 35 years. It took us 35 years to adopt a new hymnal. Churches change slowly. People's instinct in religion is not to change quickly. So it's a strange argument that it's there fully formed 35 years after Paul, and Paul didn't have any idea about it whatsoever. It's a really strange argument, and scholars are finally beginning to realize it's a really strange argument. So increasingly, people are like, yeah, that's not really a good argument against that. So one of the top New Testament scholars in the world, Luke Timothy Johnson, who he's top shelf. 25 years ago, wrote a whole book that kind of blew up the scholarly community, saying, "Yeah, Paul wrote 1st, 2nd Timothy, and Titus. Come on, guys." I'm like, knock it off. Okay. So I say, like, I know I'm standing in the minority, but I'm standing with a really smart guy who's like the top of his game, and everyone knows he's the top of his game. So, that's those ones. The book of Hebrews is a little odd one out. If you ask Deacon Michael will tell you Paul wrote it. Absolutely, Paul wrote it. We read it in English, so we can't get this. But if you read the Greek, it's radically different than the way Paul writes. I mean, radically different. I'm not real adept. I used to be much better Greek than I am now. I just don't keep it up. But it's fair to say I probably never got to that place where you get, like you have an instinct for a language, like you kind of know how it should be, and you don't know why. You don't know you can't quote the rules from the grammar, but it's wrong to say, you know, I is going to the shop. Like you don't know technically why, but you've spoken it. I never got to that level, but there's a couple people who have, and those people say, what Hebrews is written like? Luke. The language is almost identical to Luke and Acts. The way the grammar is used, the way the Greek is written. What do we know about Paul? What we know about Luke is that he knew Paul. Partway through the book of Acts, he joins Paul's little adventure. Like it goes from saying they did this, to we did this, we did this, we did this. And so what it looks like, and this is what people have been saying, people have been saying this for 150 years, it looks like somebody wrote down somebody else's sermon. Now, that means it really kind of is Paul, but being written down by Luke. So I always thought I was always vying for Apollos. I was like, yeah, Apollos was the really scholarly guy. He wrote really good Greek. He was a native Greek speaker, and that's what this book looks like. They've convinced me it is Paul's sermon, but written down by someone else who was applying it for other people. And that makes sense because what is Paul? He's a rabbi. Is he focused on the way that Torah continues? Yeah. And he's focused on the way the temple worship continues now in the new community. And this goes back to that thing of, this is why I said it would all come together at the end. It all comes back to, are we a new religion? We're not. We're a fulfilled religion. We're an old religion. So the Torah has to have continuing meaning for us. All those rules of sacrifice, how did they get played out now in the new covenant community? Jesus completes the sacrifices, so you don't have to follow all those rules. But there's lots of things that do carry forward. And in fact, one of the things that carries forward is bishop, elder, deacon. They had those in all the way back to Moses. What does Moses do under the advice of his father-in-law, Jethro? You can't handle all this. Get 70 elders to handle things for you, right? Let them do the work and they can report to you. So Moses is the bishop. The word bishop literally means overseer. Like if you've ever worked on a construction site, the guy giving the orders is the overseer. It's all it means. Moses, you're the overseer. You got the elders to do your thing. And then you've got deacon means helper or servant. They had lots of helpers. So the office goes all the way back to the time of Moses, and Christians just go, yeah, we can keep using that. So it's not something new. But if you're operating with the assumption of development, and remember I said it goes back to the mid-19th century? No, another big theory that came up in the mid-19th century kind of affects us all today. Sort of became part of the water. Melissa, you looked up at me. You have an idea? Mid 1800s theory that's really, really important, still affects all of us. This guy named Charles Darwin writes a book called The Origin of Species. And all of a sudden, everything's evolving everywhere, all the time, right? It impacts every field of endeavor. But it's weird to think that in 35 years, living memory, like, okay, not you guys because you're young. Do you remember the 1984 Olympics when America won the hockey? Yeah. Does anybody who are you didn't watch the Winter Olympics? It was a surprise because America beat the Soviet Union. It was at the height of the Cold War. No one think we could beat them in hockey. There's a really good movie called Miracle that talks about how he built the team and trained them. Huh? It was a big thing. I was in a hotel in Washington, D.C. Because my parents, it was the one time we took this trip as a family to go see Washington, D.C. And my dad really wanted to put this on the television. I wasn't a big hockey fan. And literally through the closed windows of the hotel, you could hear the whole city screaming. No one our age who experienced that is going to forget it. That's how close it is when Mark's writing his gospel to the actual life of Jesus. People who were actually there with Jesus knew him. They aren't forgetting. And the same thing, these other books are being written within that time of when Paul was executed. Okay, so all this stuff works together. I'm just explaining to you why I think that these books are actually Paul. So I just didn't want you to be. I'm not presenting so much the arguments on the other side. You can find them all over YouTube or Reddit or wherever you want to go. But to me, that's why these dogs don't hunt. And I'm not like, it wouldn't shake my faith if they weren't, because people wrote in other people's words, under other people's names as a way of giving credit to them, right? At our dojo, who does Sensei give credit to for everything?
Okay.
Everything. It's always about Tanaka, right? Everything we do goes back to Tanaka. Um, that's the way they wrote in the ancient world too. They would give credit to their person above them by writing in their name. They want to be known as writing in their name and continuing their legacy. It wouldn't shake my faith if I found out that, for instance, First and Second Timothy or Titus weren't written by Paul, but or the Book of Hebrews was written by Apollos. But I think the arguments are stronger on the other side. Just boilerplate logic, quite apart from scholarship. But if you're operating under this assumption, then you're looking for all these other things because you're looking for change as opposed to looking for continuity. All right. So that was our introduction to separation in the New Testament. Didn't get much into the Catholic epistles. We ran out of time. And I also want to publicly thank Dr. Stephen DeYoung for his work as well, because I just consolidated a lot of stuff. I heard him consolidate really well in a lecture, so I have to. I'm not doing it as well as he did, but I'm doing my best. The Catholic epistles again are written more to the whole church abroad, as opposed to First, Second Timothy, and Titus are written to pastors, what they have to do. Just because they're into pastors doesn't mean they're not good for all of us. There's really good stuff in there for those of us who are facing a world that is hostile to our faith in particular. First Peter's the same way. So I thought that's why I thought First Timothy or First Peter would be good places to go next. Something we could do over the course of the summer together, and then a plan is to start the Gospel of John in the fall. So you guys have preferences?
First Timothy.
First Timothy? Cool. Anyone else agree? Disagree? Okay, First Timothy it is. We will start with First Timothy when I get back from Japan.
I'm going to take one of these for Megan and one for the Heimlich.
By all means.